Hook asterisk. I didn't even have to drop the phone to hear the bruise on my voice that his sister slung at me as I stood in front of the high school trophy case. "You'll never get out of that one lousy lab job, Leela," she hissed, inches from my ear. "You're chasing dreams with no future. Good thing your dad's in the army, he can't afford to waste our time on you." Her words didn't just echo the family's disdain. They struck a kind of cruel silence in the room, the same silence that had settled over me when my thesis was dismissed, when the conference chair cackled, "Nice species, but it's not evidence, it's art." That moment, thick with the smell of sterile labs and stale dreams, was the beginning of a lifetime of rejection. I walked out of that room, my palms sweating but my heart determined to rise above the indifference that had been handed to me like a palatable stew. Hash the painful departure and relentless pursuit. The night before I left, my father called me into his dim kitchen, the light a pale amber across his tired face. He held out a battered envelope and whispered, "Your sister earned her name, you need to learn to live." Inside were flyers of every plant-based drug test, forensic databases, and a list of cases that had been lost for decades, until now. I felt the weight of every scornful lyric those parents had sung about my nonsense. But I chose instead to clutch a cheap backpack, the same one that had taken my textbooks from the lecture hall, and walked out with the sunrise bleeding through the old windows, the city's murmur a steady drumbeat as I headed for an unknown path. The first step into urban forensics wasn't glamorous. My colleagues, ever proud of their clean-cut evidence, scoffed at my notebooks piled with dried capitula and soil spectra. I was told, why bother with weeds when the justice system doesn't care? I had to prove that even a desiccated seed capsule could unveil a timeline, that a cotton boll uprooted from a crime scene could speak louder than the police cuff. It was an island of absurdity in a sea of seriousness. When the city detective, skeptical as a rain-shy kitten, brought me the trace of a one-sealed leaflet in a cold case, I knew the world was still pretty sure of its shallow walls. I spent nights in cramped apartments, looking at slides under microscope, fighting the gnawing doubt that came from a family that had called me a houseplant. I became the whisper of a tired microspore, the scent of petrichor in the night sky, the tiny voter of truth in crime scenes that the world had thought to ignore. Every morning I read my father's old letters, and each time the poetry of seeds grew into something that was no longer a fable but a freight train of evidence. I walked the streets, catalogued scattered petals, logged burnt bark. For each case I closed, for each guilty heart I exposed, the city pulsed a little louder. Hash the arduous ascension and profound triumph. In the beginning, my work was just a footnote in the grand courthouse narratives. Judges and jurists looked down at me as a mute pianist in a band of full-metal offenders, flaunting the art of her biology in a world that didn't care. But in the darkest cells of those old cases, where the body's truth had gone silent, there lay a whisper of life, tiny, relentless, patient. I turned those whispers into proof. I remember the first time someone called my work genius. It was a prosecutor with a scar on his wrist, eyes electric, after defending a victim who was a skeptic of my plants. He walked into my office, toothy grin, and said, "I was wrong. The seed trace you found, there it was." The suspect had the same trace in his pocket, a leaf that hadn't wilted. He flung his evidence bags with an easy shrug, then left. My cheeks ached not from humiliation, but from the cool weight of being believed. The seasons turned like the pages of a botanical textbook. I chronicled the time a ricotta leaf in a casserole in the alleys of Brooklyn had become a strand in discerning the daughter of a missing heiress. I made a name by tackling cases that had spun long-drawn webs of whispered lies in the courtroom, my deeds documented with the heft of chromatograms. I built a consultancy that could read the blood garnish of a crime scene through leaves that had never been meant to be witnesses. And then a bold breakthrough came. I amalgamated dried agricultural samples from the outskirts of the desert into a forensic database that unmasked a syndicate that had been selling contraband herbicides. I am not saying I hunted them alone, but I was the guardian bridge between science, evidence, and justice. The field of forensic botany was no longer in the naysayers' documentation, it was now part of the core story in courtrooms. Speeding through the report meant I began to alter the very fabric of how detectives treated plants under the law, the very same little green things that had once been classified as trash. I felt my heart ricochet in my chest. The world was not yet finished spinning around my work, but the seeds were taking root. The calmer the morning sun cast as a hard line on my office wall, the more I knew how far I had come. The city cheered papers that burned for my forensic labs. I had fed a career, grown a patch of seemingly insignificant evidence into forensics because of the capacity of my conviction. That a seed counter can change a death row verdict, that a leaf can bring a murderer into the light. Hash the cathartic return and poetic justice. A decade later, when the ticker blazed the headline for bestseller length, The Botanical Detective, the color aqua, ran across the page in a phrase staggering with pride, I decided it was time to slip home. The road to my childhood home smelled of crumbling brick and dust dunes from the family ranch, and the memory tasted as bitter as the smell from the heavy attack pathogen lab nights. I wanted to hear the same voices of emptiness that the paper had named irreplaceable, replaced with astonishment. On the porch, the once effortless girl, her hair straight as cannon steel, was sketching her teenage self with a paintbrush. In her ears whispered a steady job, a life carved out by her father's sleeve, a small amount of money. "Dad, I'm here," I announced, breath alive with anticipation. "Pat." The calm daughter, both her grandmother and me, was more sad-eyed than there were family jokes. "It was you," she whispered, "that lilac sycamore grew into this desert." Suddenly the kitchen glowed as the lamps flickered, and we all saw that we had an audience. My father, who was on the phone to the fire ward, walked in with a reek of burnt metal and found me. He stared. If I had known the sort of fighting he'd made, I would have smaller eyes. I raised my hand, palm showing a small leaf from the new case file. A established drizzle gazed, still fat, impressed at waking up, meaning outside, a thin smile brushing at the corner of the mouth. "You've taken the whole city, Grandma," I said. "Now it sings with the ground ears." He looked at my hand, the leaf crisp, tiny and dense with living blood. They had fallen, they were friends of the city, and I could confirm the parents never touched their feet. Out stuff I had moved, she turned to call these small little comrades as mustard kings. "We never gave the green back to them," he said. "Your joke," she later refused to shake my hand, later so long. The scent that had filled the space, cucumber green, looked they had gained a smaller fear, a feeling that lacked. "I told you I can't address anything that's not possible." She was most melodramatic, but the reflection was in the camera that never will go to where it disappeared. I could feel the weight of all I'd carried from the dead crime among the cells in cubic sand, and it was a cathartic memory of the gland of never besides, in the middle of the thin art. I held the ground case of that day and let it deduster in outside. The group went to the one where they would name them for the growth of farmers, never in solutions that destroyed their name. Add of surprise can. There was a final Thales and his mom was all there. It's a flood-forgiven scenario. On this morning the distribution, it was that Terra Fuji that promised the dark little confronted. He helped them just and appraised them how and what. What is under the appearance, you are the cas plates, TP, you are the thing structures that to them, we have that. My prince and my talent big grin never needed any to open them all. In the final pedal to the cloth, my father kept it. I had built my entire do and smell was at it from what love is not what we do in, you decide we farm has to hold the things. We should come again well yet in horror or still. In that living time of gone, we add the green shaded with rushing, it will get, it is the base of there, but his that his first prick bold may have said for a GN table for end journey. There was also the rumor of the leaving within by. On that story worthy is done in a worked basically so. The thing on the new story time, you might see a area and, these were we were part of something that encountered belie wrong use of. They that are undergoing. We're sometimes our own smallest self in the hands, the green route where the breaking barrier harbor releases a full day and a trap, so we stop.